My name is Mike Bergin. I'm a professor of environmental engineering at Duke University. Prior to that, I was a professor for about 16 years at Georgia Tech in environmental engineering. My expertise is air quality and measuring air pollutants and their effect on health, climate, and renewable energy. And I've been doing this now. I've been a professor now. This is my 25th year, so I've been a professor for 25 years researching air quality. So as time goes on, we've learned more and more that environmental pollution and air quality affects human health. But one huge problem has been to try to characterize our exposure to air pollutants and the health outcomes. And one super interesting thing that has happened recently is many types of low-cost sensors that measure air pollution have actually become available. And the interesting thing about that is now we can actually characterize people's homes, outdoors, and people's neighborhoods, and we can find what people are exposed to in indoor environments and outdoor environments during their normal daily lives. At the same time, there's been ways that we can actually figure out what people's health impacts are. So for example, we used to have to measure blood and urine, and we still do that. But there's also really interesting sensors coming online that allow us to make measurements of people's health and how it's related to chemical exposures, environmental exposures. So for example, this is an Oura ring. It's a ring that is actually sort of like a Fitbit. I have one on right now. And it measures activity, our sleep, how our heart beats, our body temperature. And I think this has been fantastic. So some of our studies now are integrating these indoor sensors to measure indoor pollution, to also measure with health outcomes using these rings, and then linking exposures of environmental contaminants with our activity and our health. And I think that what's going on now is working in California with USC and a collaboration with Duke University, we're beginning to integrate not just these indoor sensors for air quality, but also health using these new technology, so we can really figure out how health is being affected when people are exposed to various pollutants, and how things like people's sleep is affected, how their movement and activity is affected, and how their hearts and their general health is affected. So I think, and one thing that's been super exciting is all these advances in AI, although sometimes we wonder what these advances mean and what AI means, but AI has allowed us to take all of this data that we're getting now and to try to figure out what the meaning of the data is and how people's exposures are actually affect their health. And so AI has actually has helped us actually now integrate these low-cost sensors to make important health outcome estimates. Well, now that we have sensors, low-cost sensors that give us a vast amount of information about environmental quality, particularly air quality, what we're starting to find is in some places the air quality, especially indoors, is much worse than we originally thought. Concentrations are much higher. It has to do with all sorts of things that we've taken for granted. Cooking and the use of household products and things like scents and all the additives in the construction industry that are used in our homes and in our furniture. So we're starting to understand that these environmental exposures are maybe higher than we thought. And one thing we do know is the elderly, young people, and people with health problems are much more sensitive to indoor environment. And so we do know now that, first of all, we're learning way more about the indoor environment than we knew before because of the ubiquity of low-cost sensors. We're learning people are being exposed to higher concentrations of things that are potentially harmful. We do know from many health studies that vulnerable populations, as I said, the elderly and young people, are much more affected by these. And furthermore, what we're starting to realize is low-income areas of towns often have much worse air pollution. They're in much closer proximity to sources, like industries and roads. Oftentimes, the windows are left open in these places, and they have the indoor sources typically that we know dominate sometimes indoor exposures, things like cooking and all sorts of products that are used indoors that can generate high pollutant concentrations. And furthermore, as our climate warms up, we're also starting to realize that some of these lower income areas are much hotter than the higher socioeconomic status areas. So this kind of heat stress also combines with this environmental exposure to really exacerbate health effects in certain parts of town. And this is something we're very interested in as well. So recently, the use of indoor air purifiers has exploded. So I think it just shows that the public does have some concern for indoor air quality. But our past studies have shown that when you use air purifiers, and of course not all air purifiers work the same, some work better than others, but if you use adequate air purifiers designed for your space, what we found is that there's actually intense improvements in acute respiratory stress. So in other words, what happens is when air purifiers are used, particularly in areas that are somewhat polluted, people breathe a lot easier, and particularly the sensitive population, people who have asthma or any breathing problems. So I think we became very interested because we measured the air pollution indoors, and we measured people's health response as we filtered the air, and we got very positive effects. And so I'm really excited about the air purifiers. One thing that is tough about the air purifiers is they're not cheap, and you have to replace the filters, and that's not something we love. But I think as competition goes on in that market, I think hopefully the prices will come down and this will be something accessible for everyone, because we do know that there's really positive benefits to using air purification. And I would say, even though I live in a place right here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that's very clean, we have about 5 micrograms per cubic meter of PM2.5, and the standard is about 12. We do have air purifiers in our home. One of my children has asthma, and I'm pretty sure anecdotally that we kept his asthma at bay by using this air purification, at least in part.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I became very interested, like many people, in measuring health outcomes and performance because I run a lot and I'm pretty athletic and I'm getting older and I want to see how well I'm doing as I exercise and if it's having an impact on my life. So I began using things like a lot of us use, Fitbits, but more recently I read it, this is 3 or 4 years ago, about the Oura Ring. What I had heard on the radio is that the Oura Ring had been used because it also measures person's temperature, body temperature. It was used during COVID to detect people who were becoming symptomatic for COVID. So I became very interested in the Oura Ring, and I first got the ring and started wearing it myself several years ago, tracking my sleep and my fitness levels, and I became really excited about looking at my parameters, how well I sleep, and just what my overall health was. And based on that, we decided to try to use this as part of our health studies for health outcomes in our environmental exposure projects, and in this case, the environmental exposure of air pollutants. And I think the Oura Ring holds a great promise in this. It gives us an idea of how well we're moving around, our activity. It gives us an idea of how well we're sleeping, and then a bunch of other parameters of our breathing and respiratory response. So what I also like about it is, what I really like about it is, so you can see there's sensors on the inside of the Oura Ring. I have 2 of them. This is my first Oura Ring. They're very easy to wear, and I personally did not really enjoy wearing 24 hours a day a wrist monitor, so I think I like it, and I'm curious about people's sleep, how environmental exposure affects their sleep, and I think the rings hold great promise for looking into that. So I find it comfortable, I like wearing it, I forget I have it on, but I think the data coming from it, I think there's going to be explosive growth in these kinds of things, the things that are easy to wear, perhaps the rings. There's already been explosive growth in things like Fitbits, but I think we're going to start looking very closely at this information. I look at the information and I modify my behavior. Sometimes when I sleep bad, I try to reflect on why, and I try to have a sort of a better evening and trying to, whatever I did the night before to not make me sleep, try to not do that again. And I found that modifying my behavior has actually, I've done it because of the ring. So I think it holds great promise in our studies. I think, if anything, it's going to teach us about how our activities affect our health. So I think it's great for people to use, and even if in the end for a study like the one we're doing, if we do not find any solid relationship between environmental exposure and our activity from the ring response, I think that everyone will enjoy using it, and I think it will improve their health. I think there's no doubt about it, just by looking at the data and modifying our behavior.
Thank you.
Yep.